Perhaps no surprise that that ad showed a race from Great Britain that had only 5 runners in it, which, as Jenny alluded to, is one of the great challenges that British racing faces. Winfred, thank you for the opportunity. I realise that I'm here to speak on behalf of an industry that couldn't be any less vertically integrated than Hong Kong, nor one that could have a more anachronistic and outdated and arguably ridiculous model for transferring value from the betting industry to racing. The presentation that I've got for you, which I'll take you through, I apologise in advance for the fact that it's probably a bit more mechanical than some of the others. It does set out an environment that is probably alien to many people in this room. Hopefully it will dispel some myths about British racing and the environment in which we operate. And there are some green shoots within it as we move towards the back end of the presentation. British racing in the wagering market, there's no doubt that British racing is unique. The nearest equivalent would probably be Ireland, but as I said, it's really an alien environment to many people in this room. It is without question the most competitive and deregulated wagering market in the world, and so from a punter's perspective, it's a fabulous environment in which to operate or in which to punt. There are virtually no barriers to changing operators. The margins are hugely competitive, they're very low, and it is a market that's predominantly win and place focused. The tote share of the market within Britain is less than 4%. It's dominated by the big bookmakers. We do, however, have relationships with the betting industry across a number of channels. A number of these key channels are actually held direct by the race courses rather than by British Horse Racing Authority. Those key relationships are, well, to start with, there's the levy, which is in effect a piece of legislation that I'll take you through that kicked off back in 1961. It was perhaps no more relevant then than it is now. The representation to the levy is done by British Horse Racing on behalf of the sport. Media rights is really the key income driver for the sport. Media rights now represent a greater share of income for the industry than the levy does. We have a number of touch points for media rights through the betting shops, terrestrial TV via an exclusive deal with Channel 4, where we're fortunate enough to have about 90 days a year of terrestrial coverage on TV. Digital TV and Bet to View, which is obviously online wagering vision. And all of those channels are managed or overseen by media rights companies that represent the racecourses where the rights are held. Racecourses also predominantly have the sponsorship and the tote arrangements. Interestingly, in the UK, the tote is actually owned by one of the major bookmakers, which in itself obviously creates some challenges. The second slide just talks a little bit about the levy. I'll run through this quite quickly for you. As I said, the levy was established in 1961, quoting from the government in 1999, the levy is a mechanism for transferring funds from the business of betting on horse races to horse racing in a broad sense. The levy rate has historically been based on balancing the needs of racing, which are incredibly hard to define, and the betting industry's capacity to pay, rather than the true commercial value of the product and without any economic impact analysis. The current legislation, importantly, albeit it's 1961, the current legislation does not capture any remote gambling. So any online wagering that's taken from offshore operators, and 19 of the top 20 bookmakers betting on British racing have their remote locations offshore, the current legislation does not capture any remote gambling. In 1961, that obviously wasn't much of an issue. Today, it's a huge issue, and we saw last year for the first time that William Hill's online operations or remote operations actually took more bets on racing than they took in their retail outlets. So the channel shift is unsurprisingly significant. It's much faster than probably anyone envisaged, and so you have a situation where the current legislation just doesn't capture any of that. It's also worth noting that in the retail market where the levy does cover, the big four operators of William Hill's, Corals, Ladbrokes and Betfred represent about 85% of the market, but obviously in the remote market or the online market, it is much more diverse. Market trends in 2008-2009, British racing accounted for 44% of the retail market. Jenny showed some slides earlier, some not particularly pretty ones from a British racing perspective, but one of her slides showed earlier that in less than 10 years, the market share of the gaming machines within betting shops in Britain has grown to about 38%. That's obviously taken a reasonable amount of market share away from racing. It's not the only thing. There's no question that the competitiveness of our product has decreased in that time as well. So as a betting medium, it's become less attractive. And in 2013, 2014, our market share had fallen to 38%. Horse racing profitability for the bookmakers did fall reasonably dramatically, but margins have consolidated in the last couple of years, although again, as one of Jenny's slides showed, in 2013, each of the major three retail bookmakers showed an increase in margin on British racing. The interesting thing about that is that that was grown off the back of one race. That was grown off the back of the Grand National, where we had a phenomenal result, and because we get paid on margin, it actually drove a very significant uplift in the levy yield. And I'll talk about our inability to protect that soon. In terms of the remote market, unfortunately, when Winfred talks about access to customer information, at the moment we have no access to customer information, apart from, thankfully, the agreement that we have with Betfair and an agreement that we're working on with some of the major bookmakers at the moment, which will give us better access to information. But at the moment, we have no direct access to information on the remote market. And as I noted before, William Hill's business has now overtaken the size of their retail market. Active mobile users continues to grow very significantly, and the bet-to-view streams have grown at a rate of north of 40%, almost 50% year on year for the last 5 years. So that channel shift is, as I said, very significant. This slide sets out the levy income and yield and also breaks down the prize money by contributor. The levy yield, you can see there the stark trend from 2007, 2008, where over the next 3 years through to 2010, 2011, the levy yield virtually halved from 115 million to 59 million. What that meant was a very significant cut in funding to prize money and other distributions made from the levy board. Thankfully, it has stabilised in the last few years, but that cliff came about through a bad run of results, through a decline in the competitiveness of the market or our own racing product, where we weren't able to create value, and a very significant market shift to offshore. In the last few years, the levy yield has improved slightly, and we've been able to put in place some protections around that, which I'll talk about in a minute. In terms of the prize money contributors and the prize money distributions, what you can see there is that owners make a very significant contribution to prize money. But importantly, as you can see through there, the red bar on the lower graph, what really held up the prize money within the UK through that period of significant levy decline was the racecourse's ability to contribute to prize money. And that was through the fact that they are very commercial models. They're hugely customer focused, and they were also able to generate much more significant media rights income through improved media deals and aggregation of their media rights. So without the support of the racecourses through that period, you would have seen a much more significant decline in prize money in Britain. Thankfully, in the last few years, we've been able to put in place some protections around the levy. And we've also put in place now prize money agreements which ensure that a fixed proportion of the racecourse's media rights income flows through to the horsemen. In terms of the deal with Betfair and also the other major bookmakers, Breon spoke rightly about the genuine partnership arrangement that exists between British Racing and Betfair. There's no question that Betfair are incredibly good corporate citizens within the UK. We have a very good relationship with them. We signed a deal with them in July 2012, which contributes, as Breon said, 40 million over 5 years. It was a landmark agreement. It basically transferred what was previously a voluntary contribution from Betfair into a contractual obligation for 5 years. And when you consider that our levy yield this year will be about 70 million, this represents more than 10% of the annual yield. Importantly, for Betfair, what they were really seeking as part of that agreement was some certainty around the delivery of product, so that agreement actually has a KPI framework structure as part of it, which sets out a minimum number of races, some criteria around field sizes, the number of races that we run, etc. So it was all about providing certainty of product to Betfair, and in exchange for that, British Racing were able to contract some certainty for 5 years in terms of income. Last year, off the back of that, although in many ways not as strong a deal as the Betfair one was, we were also able to put together with the 4 leading retail operators a 4-year agreement which sets out for those 4 operators to provide a minimum guarantee to the levy as well as an additional voluntary contribution. They will contribute a minimum of 52 million over the next 4 years, and those 4 operators, as I said, contribute about 85% of the market. These agreements will not exactly be coterminous, but they'll be close. They also link to timetables around our media rights deals. So over the next 3 years, we've got some work to do to improve the value of our product through field sizes, the way in which we present our product to ensure that we either can move to a post-levy environment or be able to renew these commercial deals. Thankfully, although we were probably saying this 10 years ago in Britain, when back in 2004 we thought that we were going to see a commercial replacement to the levy. So I'm hoping that we don't fall at the last hurdle again 10 years later. We are seeing some prospect. We do have a very supportive government at the moment. They are keen to remove themselves from being involved in the levy, and they have certainly set out already a recent amendment to the legislation which provides for the extension of the levy to collect from offshore operators. There's 2 parts to this. The first is the extension of the levy to offshore. The operators really moved offshore for 2 reasons. One, there's a 10% saving in levy, but probably more important, there's a 15% saving on tax. So the tax will also be captured now, which means that the remote operators will pay a 15% tax on their gross win, as well as whatever the current levy rate is, which at the moment is 10.75%. And we expect that to be a part of next year's levy deal in 2015 for the 2016 year. So that's quite significant when you consider that the size of the offshore market is somewhere in the order of 20 to 25 million, and the total current levy yield is only 75 million. The second part of the future of the levy is much more significant than the extension, and that is about levy replacement. Importantly for us within British Racing, the government has committed to a consultation in the summer on wider levy reform, replacement of the levy, including consideration for the introduction of a racing right. A racing right, in our mind, really replicates or parallels with the Australian racefields legislation. It's enshrined in legislation that all betting operators then are required to obtain an authorisation, racing provided with some kind of civil right of enforcement, and importantly for us, it'll basically provide a level playing field. So the extension of the levy to offshore is the first stage of a level playing field. It means that the remote operators will be paying the same as the retail operators. The second part, which is much more significant and in my view much more important to the future of British racing, is the importance of a levy replacement. Not just to remove the levy board, an independent statutory body which sits between the betting industry and racing, but importantly it removes government from the involvement of the funding of racing, and it puts into the hands of racing the direct relationship with betting which it needs. It is worth noting that the betting operators do pay a very significant proportion of their gross margin towards British racing via media rights, levy, and also tax to the government. So we're quite conscious of how we balance that going forward and recognise that the model which might exist in Britain in terms of a racing right is probably quite different to what you might see in Australia, but at the same time have some very significant parallels. So in terms of a non-vertically integrated structure, that's where we're at in Britain. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.